Hey friends, Michael Kingswood back at you again with story time. So it's been a while since I've done a video, and that's a bunch of different reasons. Part of it's business, part of it's family, but main reason is I've realized I'm not actually a professional voice actor, and fun as it is for me to read, and maybe you like me reading or maybe not, but it's probably better for me to get some pros to it. So we've been getting some pros who've been putting my stuff into audiobook form, and I figure I'll share that here with you and on the podcast that I'm starting, which is guess what it's called? It's called Story Time with Michael Kingswood, just like this video thing. And eventually the videos and the podcasts will be synced, but right now they're not. But they're going to be in the future eventually. So I'll be doing some that going forward. We're going to start off with a novella I wrote called Veritas Morte. Veritas Morte came out of me watching Voltron, because Voltron's awesome, and thinking about Prince Lothar. And Prince Lothar, in Voltron, he's kind of a douche. He's a psychopath, cardboard cutout bad guy, right? Must conquer this planet because we have to conquer the planet because, and not much depth to him. And I got to thinking, well, what if Prince Lothar he was actually like a real person, and he's the prince of this empire and doesn't. Everything the Empire does is normal. It's what he grew up with, and doesn't realize that it's actually the evil Galactic Empire. Dum bum bum. Right? That's gonna kill everybody and enslave everything. Right? It's just his normal way of life. Right? He's grown up, getting ready to take over the Empire ship, the Imperial throne, at some point. Prayerfully a long distance future, and what's the big deal? So I wrote this story. It's about this guy. His name is Lucian, and he's crown prince to the Korathi Empire in my story. And some stuff happens as he's out on his first campaign alongside his dad to see what's going on outside the Empire. And he has to deal with it. And he gets some wake-up calls in a bunch of ways and has to deal with, hey, are we really the good guys here? Not sure. Okay, and he figures it out from there, right? So, not a super long story. It's 17,000 words. In print, it's a little bit less than 100 words, 100 pages, rather. The audiobook is like 1.8 hours. I got a great guy named Keith Michaelson to do the audiobook narration, and we're going to let him do the reading on this one. So, I'll put the cover up, and Keith will talk, and then after he's done, I'll come back and give some more thoughts. Now, we're not going to do the whole book in this video, right? That'd be stupid long and stupid amount of disk space to take up on my hard drive and uploading time and all that sort of thing. Plus, you don't want to do that. So, we'll split it up scene by scene, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes per scene over the next month or two, and we'll go from there. And then after that, be a different book. And in between, I'll intersperse my very amateur reading of my other stories, and we'll get on a roll like that, and hopefully it'll be good. If it's not, at least I get some validation out of it. It'll be fun. Sit back, relax, get your beer or your scotch or your coffee or your nothing, and listen as Keith tells you a story.
Veritas Morte, a science fiction novella by Michael Kingswood. Narrated by Keith Michaelson. Lucian paused before the entrance field to the side door of his father's audience compartment and straightened his sash, royal purple as befitting his station, then settled his belt more comfortably over his hips. His rapier jangled softly in the quiet of the corridor as he drew himself up to his full height and inhaled slowly. Then, with a quick nod to himself, he stepped forward. The door slid open soundlessly as he broke the entrance field, and he absently noted two of his guardian drones zipping through ahead of him, their sensors probing for threats even here. You never knew where an assassin may lie in waiting, but it seemed far-fetched indeed that someone would make an attempt on his life in this place. But, as his chief of staff and tutor, Abernathy continually reminded him, complacency had brought down powerful men since before Caesar was knifed by his friends in the Senate. Lucian tried not to dwell on that bit of cheeriness as he strode through the door, passing 2 Marines in their ceremonial armor, with its gleaming polish and engravings. The 2, already standing at rigid attention, seemed somehow to stiffen further as he passed, and they snapped their rifles to present arms in unison. He spared them a quick nod and then, just as quickly, put them out of his mind as he passed into the compartment. It was large as far as spaces went on board ship, but though the ship's designers had done their best to recreate it, the compartment was a far cry from the throne room in the Imperial Palace on Quora 7. Fluted columns of blue-gray faux stone lined the room from the main entrance to the dais at the end where a replica of the imperial throne sat, just as they did back home. But the dimensions were less grand, the filigree less gleaming, the carvings and tapestries replicas. Still, Lucian had to admit it was an impressive sight. Had he not grown up in the palace and gotten to know every twist and turn intimately, he would have no cause to voice complaint, and one reason to prefer this to the real thing. He raised his eyes to the ceiling as he always did when he came in here. As back home, it was all crystalline panes carefully treated to remain transparent, despite the lights within the chamber, and inlaid in supports so thin it seemed they could not possibly support the weight. But while on Quora the view beyond consisted solely of the blue-pink sky and the myriad puffy white clouds that roved on the winds of the winds, here he beheld creation in all its majesty. There the star field lay, far more dense than could ever be seen planet-side, and from this location the halo of the galactic center, where a mammoth black hole sent brilliant beams of light to the far edges of the cosmos, was clearly visible. It always took his breath away. Lucian? He pulled his eyes down from the stars and turned to fully face the dais, where His Imperial Majesty, Archibald Bandemir, ruler of the Quarathi Empire and protector of the Chosen, stood with his chamberlain and a cluster of high-ranking officers of the fleet and ground forces. More Marines stood along the wall behind the throne, still enough that the eye almost passed them over without noticing, and Lucian saw Abernathy waiting as well, off to the side. But he paid his aide no mind, instead striding quickly but not so quickly as to break decorum, straight toward the dais. The Emperor wore his curly, coal-black hair, so similar to Lucian's own, cut short on the sides and top, but long at the back, as tradition dictated. His uniform was white, a contrast with the charcoal gray of his officers and Lucian's, and he too wore a sash of purple, though his also bore the golden half-moon and star of rule, while all others were bare. He wore a rapier on his left hip, balancing a holstered pistol on his right, and his boots were polished to a mirror shine. "Father," Lucian said as he reached the group of men. He bowed deeply to the Emperor, both hands cupping his heart as he rose. "Forgive my tardiness." The Emperor made a quick dismissive wave of his hand that seemed to say, "No matter," but he said nothing for a time. His eyes traced up and down Lucian's body as though looking for blemishes. Finally, after an interminable pause, he sniffed and gestured toward the officer to his left, a man in his late middle years whose close-cut sandy hair failed to conceal the presence of multiple silver strands in its mist. He had once been lean, but now possessed a noticeable paunch, and he wore the pale blue sash of the fleet over his dress uniform blouse. "Admiral Corrigan was just briefing us on the status of the Corellis campaign." Lucian's ears pricked up, and he could not suppress an excited grin. The Admiral noticed Lucian's expression and returned it with a knowing smile of his own. "Eager to get a piece of the action, my prince. I recall my first campaign like it was yesterday. The Emperor cleared his throat, and the Admiral stopped speaking abruptly. He looked abashed for a moment before he regained his bearing and took on a more formal tone. "As I was saying, Your Majesty, Task Force 17 has taken up blockade stations around Neonovos 6 as fragged. Orbital defenses have been eliminated, and now we control every jump point in and out of the system. I project that without resupply, the colony will only be able to sustain its defense fields for 3 weeks at the outside, at which point the Marines— Admiral Corrigan nodded at the burly bald man to his left who wore the Marine Corps' red and gold on his sash— will assault. How long to take the planet? 2 months, Your Majesty, the Marine General stated with quiet assurance. Though, as previously briefed, we can expect some level of insurgent resistance for a year or more afterwards. The Emperor nodded. Very well, gentlemen. In that case— An electronic chime rang, and the Chamberlain darted to the side where a datapad was mounted on one of the columns, so as not to be readily visible from in front of the throne. He tapped the screen and frowned slightly. The delegation has docked, Your Majesty, he said, his falsetto voice seeming to set his jowls to flapping as he moved his jaw. Compared with the military men present, he seemed the epitome of sloth in his billowing blue silk kimono, the fat of his belly and arms swaying lasciviously with every move. But appearances could be deceiving, Lucien knew well. Minister Emerson has made the initial greeting and expects they will arrive within 3 minutes. The Emperor nodded again and said, We will continue this later. Then he gestured quickly with his left hand. At once, the gaggle of men dispersed to their places on the edge of the dais on either side of the throne. The Emperor gave Lucien a meaningful look and turned to ascend the stairs to his seat of power. Lucien followed, taking up station to the right of the throne and a half-pace behind. Then he settled into parade rest. They did not have long to wait. True to Minister Emerson's report, 3 minutes later a chime sounded from the main entrance doors. A second later, the heavy faux wood swung inward, and a contingent of armsmen strode into the audience compartment in 2 columns. The new arrivals wore green and brown fatigues with electroplate armor fastened over vital areas, and bore repeating rifles at identical angles of port arms as they strode into the room. Sidearms and dueling blades on their hips completed their kit, and they had the appearance of well-trained and disciplined fighters. Lucien found himself impressed and surprised. Capestra had a reputation for prizing peace above all things, and that did not tend to breed a warrior ethos in a people. But if these men were any indication— The escort stopped and performed a well-timed right-left face, then once facing each other, took 2 steps back to open a path between their 2 columns. A single voice barked an order, and immediately they went to present arms. Minister Emerson entered the room next, striding briskly between the newcomers until he reached the end of the columns of men. Like the Chamberlain, his kimono was blue silk. Unlike the Chamberlain, his body was lean and hardened from strenuous training, and he stood proudly erect. His black hair and beard were cut short, and his dark eyes flashed with intelligence and irritation. Before Lucien had time to ponder what had irked the Minister of Diplomacy so, Emerson stepped to the side and announced in a loud voice that carried easily throughout the chamber, Your Majesty, it is my honor to present Her Highness Princess Ophelia Timison of the Capistrani Republic. A faint rustle issued from the sides as the military officers shifted on their feet. Lucien almost lost his bearing from surprise. No wonder Emerson was irritated. Princess, Lucien said to himself, disbelieving. They sent a woman to treat with us? Lucien could just see the Emperor's profile where he stood, but the sudden frown that appeared there was plain. He glanced back Lucien's way and gave him a hard look. The Capistrani, the Emperor said quietly, have some quaint notions about a woman's place. Hold your tongue. The last came like a whiplash, and Lucien clamped his teeth shut, lest he say something more. And then the princess swept into the compartment, and all thoughts left Lucien's mind, except awe. She did not stride so much as float. Her movements were so graceful. Her form was long and lean. She was at least as tall as Lucien, and he stood well above average. Her arms were toned, advertising similar sculpting in her other areas, and though her dress fit the requirements of modesty, it did not conceal so much as accentuate the curves beneath. Sky blue, trimmed in white and silver, the fabric clung to her hips enticingly before it fell to the level of her ankles, and on her torso it was just snug enough to show off the curves of her breasts without revealing too much. The neckline was nearly chaste, it was so high. The string of pearls around her neck almost rested on the fabric of her dress. Her hair, black at the roots but shifting slowly to blue-silver at the ends, flowed in lush waves to just past her shoulders, and was held back from her face by a silver tiara that was all the more elegant for its simplicity. And her face, narrow but not gaunt, rounded but not plump. Her gray-blue eyes flashed with intelligence and poise, and her lips were turned ever so slightly upward in a knowing smile. Lucian found he could not look away from her, and suddenly his heart was all aflutter. Princess Ophelia came to a halt alongside Minister Emerson and made a shallow curtsy of greeting. "Your Majesty," she said, and the warm timbre of her voice sent a shiver of delight up Lucian's spine. If he was not careful, he was going to lose his wits. He forced his eyes away, focusing on the side of his father's face as the Emperor rose and returned the curtsy with a half-bow of his own. "Your Highness, we are honored to make your acquaintance." "And I yours." She looked around quickly, taking in the military officers and Lucian at a glance before refocusing on the Emperor. "Your ship is impressive." The Emperor smiled warmly. "We have worked hard to make it so." At a gesture of his left hand, the Chamberlain advanced from his position. "I have prepared the Empress's suite for your use during your stay. Lord Morcy will show you the way." The Princess inclined her head smoothly. "I wish she were here. I had very much looked forward to meeting her one day, as her beauty and kindness were well known throughout the systems. My deepest condolences, Your Majesty." The Emperor froze for a second, his smile becoming brittle. Lucian was not sure anyone else would have noticed, but he had learned to see the signs of pain that matched his own at his mother's passing, beneath the Emperor's carefully manicured exterior. He recovered quickly and said, "Thank you," in a quiet tone. Then he drew a deeper breath and added with more of his usual force, "You must be tired from your journey. Please take your ease, and then I trust you will join my son and I for dinner." Her eyes flicked back Lucian's way, this time lingering for nearly a full second. As her gaze met his, another shiver went up his spine, and he had to restrain the urge to shift on his feet. Her smile changed then, becoming more direct, almost challenging. And then the moment was over, as she looked back at the Emperor. "It will be my pleasure." The Emperor nodded. "We dine at 1900. Until then, Your Highness." He bowed again, this time in dismissal. She had to know it for what it was, but if she took offense, she did not show it. But then, why should she be offended? The Emperor's domain spanned 36 star systems, while she represented a small planet at the hub of a middling alliance of a half-dozen worlds. And she was a woman besides. There was no doubt who outranked whom here. The Princess returned the bow with the same shallow curtsy she had made upon arrival. "Your Majesty," she said by way of farewell. The Chamberlain reached her side and gestured for her to come with him, speaking softly. As she turned to follow him out, her eyes met Lucian's one last time, and then she was gone. He swallowed heavily, suddenly realizing he was sweating. Maybe this bit of diplomacy was not going to be so boring after all.
So, hey, it looks like it's a little more exciting than Lucian thought it would be. Yeah, okay, it's only excitement over a girl, but hey, there are worse things to get excited about, right? Shoot. Alright, so hope you like that scene. Next one will be out in a few days, a week or so is going to be the schedule. If you can't wait, go buy the book, right? I mean, you can get the ebook on Amazon. It's exclusive on Amazon at the moment for a couple of reasons. Just trying out the perks they offer when you go exclusive. But you can get the print book pretty much anywhere, the audiobook anywhere you can get audio books. iTunes, Audible, and Amazon are the obvious ones, but there's literally like a dozen other places you can buy them. And it's everywhere you can think of. So either get the book or don't. wait a week and come back here and we'll play the next scene. As always, stop by the website, say hi. If you want to find out what I'm doing without waiting for me to post it here, sign up for my little email thing that is guaranteed to be spam free. You can do that through my website or, whatever. Hope you enjoyed it. Catch you the next time. Enjoy.